have Dr. Rupan Shah, who is MCH in andrology and probably the most famous andrologist we have up so much, and he's taught us so much about ART. Rupan, I have no words to just express what my talk will speak. You speak for yourself. So Rupan Shah on sperm test and what is new and what is coming and what you should be doing.
Thank you. Thank you. We have, please.
I have Dr. Rupan Shah's slides.
Ready. Is the slide seen now? Is the screen seen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So today's session is basically about summarizing various presentations from the recent ESHRE meeting. And I was asked to summarize session 71, deals with a rather complex and advanced subject of sperm quality and genetics. These are oral presentations, so that tells you that these would be of a very high quality. Now, in men and women, to identify the cause of the infertility, to see whether there is a genetic transmitted to the offspring, and use this genetic information to optimize the way in which we do the assisted reproductive technique. Now, when it comes to the male, it's a very complex scenario. There are more than 2,000 genes which are expressed in the testes. Hundreds are directly involved in spermatogenesis, and the male database lists over 200 infertility. Sometimes infertility is the main phenotype, and sometimes there's a whole complex of symptoms in which infertility is a small part. So if you were to really try to evaluate the comprehensive impact of a genetic problem as the source of male infertility, we would have to do very extensive studies that would look at numerical chromosomal defects, structural defects, single gene mutations at multiple levels, groups of deletions called microdeletions, implications of the epigenetic factors, and various molecular biochemical changes that accompany all these. And in fact, the papers that we are going to review today deal with all of these. And those of you who are not seeing it on full screen, I would recommend move to full screen because we have a lot of information on each slide. However, these studies are really advanced. The techniques that they will speak about are not performed by most of the IVF labs or clinicians in the country. So I'm happy to discuss them because they will give us future direction, but at the same time to make the talk practical and relevant to the audience, most of whom would not be very advanced specialists. I'm going to talk first for a few minutes about the commonly performed genetic tests, which every infertility specialist should be doing and should be familiar with. So there are essentially three. We check for mutation in the cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulator gene, the CFTR gene, which is related to vas aplasia. We do karyotyping to look for anomalies, and we do a YQ microdeletion study by PCR to look for loss of small gene segments on the long arm of the Y chromosome. Now, these are done in turn for obstructive azoospermia due to vas aplasia, usually bilateral, sometimes unilateral. They are done for men with primary testicular failure, resulting in either azo or severe oligo, and they would be indicated in recurrent early pregnancy loss, where we suspect a male factor may be playing a role. Now, which of these tests should be done for which indication? Because I've seen good clinics doing a random genetic study for all patients, all the tests, which is so be clear which test is indicated for which phenotype. If there is vas aplasia, the test to be done is cystic fibrosis mutation testing. You do not need to do a karyotype for a patient with vas aplasia. You do not need a YQ microdeletion. Similarly, if somebody has primary testicular failure and you're planning sperm retrieval, you may want to do karyotype and a YQ microdeletion study, but you do not need to do a very expensive CFTR mutation study. Finally, if there's recurrent pregnancy loss, then the main test you want to do is karyotyping. So please bear this in mind, because two patients, azoospermia, clinical diagnosis is not made, so they're just sent for the complete genetic profile, which is unnecessary and expensive. Now, a few more practical pointers related to this. When you're doing CFTR, cystic fibrosis mutation testing, be aware of the large gene. So there are more than 2,000 mutations that can happen in this gene. Some of these mutations are severe and some are mild. The severe mutations can lead to a life-shortening, life-threatening disease, cystic fibrosis, whereas the minor mutations will only lead to vas aplasia. And you need to know the mutation in both the husband and the wife, because both mutations get expressed. So the dark circle represents a major mutation, a minor mutation, the empty circle, no mutation. And you can see how different combinations will have different phenotypic variations. And there, but we also want to know the female to be able to then tell the patient what is his risk. It's also very important to realize that there is a huge ethnic difference, because the test panels that we get come from the West and are geared to the Caucasian population. But as you can see here, there's a marked difference between the Caucasian, which is the upper three, and the Middle Eastern, South Asian population, which is the lower five. For example, Delta 508, which is a major mutation, very common in the Caucasian, very uncommon in the non-Caucasian. On the other hand, a 5T variant, which is a minor mutation, very common in Asian, Middle Eastern population, not so common in the Caucasian. So to understand what is true for the Indian population, we actually did full gene mapping for the husband and the wife in a series of 80 men at the IRR. Rahul was the main researcher. What we found was interesting. There were several novel mutations that we found in our population that have not been described and therefore are never tested. And amongst the previously known mutations, the Delta 508, which is so common in the West, was found only in 8% of our population. And the Poly-T variant, which is the C12010, was present in 42%. 60%, 16% were carriers. So if you combine the male with the female, 9 couples in these 80 had a clinical risk of transmitting either vasoplasia or even cystic fibrosis to their offspring, and therefore the testing was important. So the practical message is that small panels from the West testing for 4 or 10 mutations may not detect many of the cases in our population. Ideally, the patient should be undergoing a sequencing of the entire CFTR gene, and both Klinefelter syndrome, this will be the commonest numerical cause of azoospermia. It's most commonly seen when the testes are very small and the FSH is high. Important message is that even in 1/4 to 1/3 of such cases, we may be able to find sperm and use these sperm for ICSI, at which point the question in the gynecologist's mind is that, will these children be normal? And the interesting thing is that clinical studies have shown that all the children tend to be chromosomally normal, probably because these sperm have come from a normal cell line. So PGD is an option, but it is not compulsory. Finally, a word about YQ microdeletion. On the long arm of the Y chromosome, there are 3 regions. Each region has several genes, and a few or all of these genes may be deleted. Now, this test is important because if in an azoospermic man, the AZF-A region or the AZF-B region are completely deleted, then there is no chance of finding sperm in testes. If, on the other hand, there is a deletion in AZF-C, then there is some chance, 30% or so, of finding sperm in azoospermic men with a YQC or an AZF-C microdeletion. But the important counseling that needs to be done is that if we find sperm and do ICSI, then the male child, if born from ICSI, inherit the same genetic problem. Needs to have this genetic counseling before they proceed with treatment. Now we come to the actual abstracts, and there are 4 papers which I'd like to review, each of them related to sperm function, each of them very advanced. So here is the first study, which asks a very important question, that if there is severe male infertility, which means the male sperm is, to what extent will that affect the early embryo development? We know that as the female age advances, the oocyte becomes older, aneuploidy rate goes up. But what happens if the sperm is weak? And the hypothesis of this author is that maybe these sperm will lead to an increase in mitotic errors. And if there are more mitotic errors after the egg and the sperm have fused, that would lead to mosaicism in the embryo. So here was the study. They looked at 331 embryos produced by couples with severe male fertility, either less than 5 million or azo with testicular sperm. And they compared it with 1,200 embryos from couples where there was no male factor infertility. And of course, NGS was done using samples from a trophic derm biopsy. And it was pre-implantation diagnosis aneuploidy. Now, to the left, you see the male factor group. To the right is the group where there was no male factor. And it is interesting, the blue box represents euploidic embryos. And in fact, in the male factor group, there were more euploidic embryos. On the other hand, if you look at the gray box, which is the mosaic embryos, the male factor group had more mosaic embryos than the remaining embryos. And the way the authors explain this is that because the age of the wife was 2 years lower in the male infertility group, that is why the eggs were better and therefore there were more euploid embryos. However, because in those cases of male factor infertility where the embryos were not euploid, there was greater mitotic error, and that resulted in greater embryo mosaicism. So what would be the clinical message for this? That in the IVF center, when you have severe male factor infertility, one, there could be an increased early embryo loss due to mitotic abnormalities causing mosaic embryos, and doing a biopsy, you probably need to look at many cells because of the risk of a mosaic embryo. The second study deals with something that is very rare, globozoospermia, which you'll see once in a while. And because it's so rare, in fact, there is not much clarity. And this is a study from the Weill Cornell University that did a very, very detailed study on these globozoospermic men. Now, as you know, sperm with globozoospermia is a sperm that has lost the acrosome. And the question that the authors asked is that if we really look at these sperm in great detail, can we identify be the best way of achieving pregnancy in these sperm? So what they did was interesting, because this would kind of represent the state of the art if you're really trying to assess the fertility of a sperm. So they did transmission electron microscopy to look at the structural integrity of the sperm head. They did an aniline blue assay which will quantify protamine. They looked at sperm chromatin fragmentation by the tunnel method. Then they looked at phospholipase C, the PLC zeta isomer is secreted by the testes, carried by the sperm, and is responsible to calcium oscillations that activate the egg. So there's an increasing amount of evidence showing that PLC deficiency will result in failure of oocyte activation. Then they looked at aneuploidy by fish. They did a genomic and transcriptomic analysis to understand the DNA and the RNA. And finally, in selected cases, they did assisted gamete stimulation by exposing them to calcium ionophore. So this was the battery of tests done to identify what was the problem with these globozoospermic men. Now they defined globozoospermia as men having more 70% round-headed sperm. So out of the 12 men, very large number, actually 9 had some normal sperm, though the majority were globozoospermic, and 3 had complete 100% globozoospermia. And the additional testing revealed, as you can see, that there was concomitant damage to the sperm chromatin. Protamine was high, SCF was elevated, cytosolic factor was low, aneuploidy was elevated, and they identified 2 genes which were overexpressed in the mutated form, which were associated with the globozoospermia. And of course, a lot of epigenetic modifications were found. Now, with the men, the 7 couples who opted for it, where there was partial globozoospermia, they did conventional IVF. Fertilization rate was low, only 31%, but they achieved 4 pregnancies, 1 pregnancy loss, and therefore 3 live births. In the 3 couples who had complete absence of the acrosome, conventional ICSI did result in a reasonable fertilization, but there was no implantation. And all of these patients had very low levels of PZC, suggesting that the oocyte activation would have been incomplete. When in the next cycle they treated these couples with calcium ionophore, the fertilization rate improved a little. Implantation went from 0 to 22%, and there was 1 live birth resulting from this. The clinical implications of this study are that if you're seeing globozoospermia, distinguish between 100% globo versus occasional normal sperms. High level of magnification, if not TM, then IMSI, may help identify the best sperm to use for conventional. And if that fails, or if you can measure PLC zeta, and if the PLC zeta is low, then consider activation of the sperm in the egg with calcium ionophore to improve the success rate. The third study is an interesting, dramatic, but for those of you who have CASA, it brings about an interesting possibility. We know that in couples with recurrent implantation failure or recurrent pregnancy loss, sperm aneuploidy is high. Now the question is, in which of these patients should we look for aneuploidy? And the question is that, is there any marker in the semen analysis that would predict higher aneuploidy? So in this study, they're looking at something called average sperm head area, which is actually measured by a software in a computerized semen analysis program. And they did the measurement of the sperm head area in normal men with normal fish, and then compared it retrospectively in a group of patients with implantation failure or recurrent pregnancy loss. Now they found with their software that a cutoff of 14.8 microns was significant, and using that cutoff, the ASHA actually predicted abnormal elevated fish much better than any other conventional semen parameter like count or simple critical morphology. So it's not a very important study, but what it tells you is that if you have a computerized system, maybe this is could look at, and if this is elevated, these patients may benefit from fish to understand better the likely outcome. Now, finally, one very important study, because this is something that always bugs IVF clinics, that if there is fertilization failure, complete fertilization failure in ICSI, which is not common, but if that happens, then why has it happened? What was the cause of the oocyte activation deficiency? Was it oocyte related or sperm related? And usually you just guess. If the embryologist says that, okay, the egg looked good, you blame the sperm and ask the patient to use donor sperm. And if the embryologist says, no, the eggs were not good, then you try to use a new stimulation protocol. So this study, again from the Cornell group, Palermo was the final author, looked at whether it is possible to try and see in this group of patients whether sperm was the causative factor or not. So they looked at, actually the study group was 116 couples, of whom 76 couples actually underwent all the investigations. And the selected couple where there was 0 to 10% fertilization only. And all these men had a measurement of the phospholipase C zeta isomer measurement. And in those cases where it was abnormal, they were further screened by the microoocyte activation test and additional NGS and other DNA RNA studies. So those diagnosed as having sperm-related failure of oocyte activation, and the remaining, it was attributed to the oocyte. And based on the PLC diagnosis, in the second cycle, those couples where the oocyte was blamed underwent another cycle of conventional ICSI, but with a different superovulation protocol. And with that change alone, the fertilization went from 2% to 59%. And instead of no pregnancy, they had a 28% pregnancy rate. In the 24 couples where they identified sperm to be the cause, based on the phospholipase C and the MOTA test, they treated the gametes with calcium ionophore, then achieved ICSI, and they had a fertilization rate that increased from 9 to 42%. They achieved pregnancy in 6 patients with successful delivery. We also identified 6 different genes that were associated with this very low PLC in the sperm. So of course, the very important study that tells you that when you have fertilization failure, rather than just blame the eggs alone or blame the sperm in every case, or use calcium ionophore for every case, if you're able to measure the PLC zeta, you will be able to target the next intervention for the egg or the sperm, and that would make the subsequent cycles more successful. So with this, I hope that you've got a mix of some basic male genetics and some very advanced male genetics, which would help you in your future practice. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this wonderful session with two previous excellent speakers from whom I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Rupin. Thank you. Excellence was shown in the last to the peak, and we did enjoy this genetic feast. A lot of things I had, how many genes were coming to play in male infertility were very beautifully clear. So we have questions for you.
Yeah, any questions?
Should we incubate DISA sample before washing? And for any
Should you incubate a sample? Maybe you can answer, because when it comes to the lab, I really don't know what the embryologist would do. Jatin, you would have an answer.
There's no specific incubation. First, you start teasing, looking for the sperms and see if you can find sperms, whether you've done TISA or a micro TISA. You need a lot of patience. You need maybe not just one, but maybe 2 or 3 embryologists. And you have to do a thorough screening. It can starting from half an hour to even 3 hours. Some centers report even 6 hours or 8 hours of searching in some patients to make sure that you get the sperm. So
okay,
there's
I
no
can add
incubation as
something
such.
here.
But,
yeah, if we are any of the T sample you, what happens is there's an initial screening, as Jatin said. If seen, then the T's then
yeah, can you hear me now?
And then incubated. Then the embryologist is locked in the lab and not left for 1 week until they find sperm. Any other questions? I'm not hearing any.
So I don't think we have any questions. Would you like to give some male infertility?
I think everyone's
Dr.
ready for
Jaideep,
lunch.
would you like to give some? Hello?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Rupin.
Hi,
Wonderful
Jaideep.
talk.
Thank you. Enjoyed your talk too.
Yeah. I think Naren's, this thing is not working, so yeah.
Better.
Yeah, so
We are more used to
something
seeing
broke
like
down
this.
than that.
Yeah.
I'm back home now from the hospital. So in the way it broke down. So Jatin and Jaideep, do you have any comments on male infertility? How it should be handled? Jatin?
Rupin, I think did. When
After
is
Rupin,
there, we
nothing, you
can't
don't
add
have to
much.
say anything.
No, I would like to say that, it's an area which is still lesser, focused by us gynecologists. And Rupin keeps on asking me why you are, always so hung up on andrology and male infertility, because I feel that people don't focus on the male. We just keep on talking about the female, and that is something I would really definitely like to emphasize to each and everyone who's listening here, because male also needs equal focus.
Yeah, I label Jaideep as friend of the andrologist. He's always in our various roles, having andrology workshops and sessions, and wonderful sessions.
And we fondly remember the Ranthambore sperms with the tigers session.
That was exceptional.
Awesome.
I guess we need to do that more often as soon as we get hold of this corona out of our lives.
Right now it'll be sperm and the corona.
I know. So let me conclude the session. Thank you, attendees. We have over 1,300 watching this live today. Yesterday we had 1150. So another 200 have added up today more. Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much for attending this. Thank you, Eris and their IVF division.